Welcome to the Utah Stories Show, ladies and gentlemen. On the program today is Danny Stewart. He's been a longtime Utah Story contributor. He has literally dozens and dozens of amazing Utah stories. He goes into some of those with us today. One thing we talk about is we talk about the legend of the Bear Lake Monster, myth or reality. Does it exist? We also talk about Danny's ghost tour and all of the myths and legends and folklore that surrounds his tour that he does in Provo, Utah. He's definitely one of the foremost folklorists and experts in cryptozoology, which is the study of creatures or monsters that may or may not exist. Really fascinating discussion. I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, Danny Stewart. The Utah Story Show is brought to you in part by Curry Pizza. Curry Pizza has been serving Indian food for over 10 years. They opened their first location in a town called Bicknell, Utah. That's when they began serving some of the incredible pizzas such as chicken tiki masala pizza with fresh spices and ingredients, old world fresh Italian sausage, and spicy sausage, as well as mango korma pizza. Guy Fieri from Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives recently learned about Curry Pizza and showed them on his program. Check out the episode, but more importantly, check out Curry Pizza in West Valley, Utah with their new location. It is truly awesome. We have it at the office quite often. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef. Premium all-natural grass-fed beef delivered right to your door free anywhere in the state of Utah. Order yours today at paisleys.com. That's PAIZLEES.com. Paisley's grass-fed beef, always the right choice. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you in part by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you are getting those precious hours or minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to your mom or your cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. On-campus housing as a community, academic support, peer mentors, friends, and constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, or theme options, and to apply, visit usu.edu/housing. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by Legends Pub and Grill. It's locally owned and serves fresh, wholesome, delicious ingredients. They have everything from awesome appetizers to main dishes like steaks, burgers, sandwiches, salads, pizzas, and calzones. Plus, they now offer gluten-free and vegetarian options. Legends features over 20 beers on tap. 30-plus craft and local beers are available, and they have talented bartenders that make all sorts of tasty creations featuring many local spirits. So go to Legends, kick back, and watch your favorite games on the big screens while you enjoy an awesome meal at their full bar. Reserve space for your group to watch the games. And Legends, best of all, can accommodate all ages. That means kids, too. Legends now has 2 locations to serve you. They have the downtown location at 677 South, 200 West, and they have a Southtown location at 10631 South, Holiday Park Drive, brand new in Sandy, Utah. It's an awesome place, so go check them out. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Stories Show. My name is Richard Marcosian. A very exciting program for you today. On the program is Danny B. Stewart. He is a writer and content provider for all things paranormal in Utah. That includes fairies and myths and legends and folklore and ghosts, and he does a Provo, Utah ghost tour that is amazing. Provo, Utah does commercials for him. It is so outstanding. He's just like a great asset to the city of Provo, and you have quite a following in Provo, right?
I have a bit of a cult following, yeah.
Yeah, and how many times have you done your tour? Have you estimated how many people have gone through it?
Total? Oh, gosh, I have no idea. Man, I've been doing it since 2011. And when I first started doing my tour, I did it for my students when I taught at Utah University as an extracurricular activity. So every semester, I'd set up a date where all my students would meet at the Provo Smiths at about 10:30 at night. And usually about 100, 190 students would come. They'd bring their families or their kids. Sometimes they're dates, obviously, and it ended up being like a long tour. It ended from like 10:30 to about 1:30 in the morning, and I'd take them all around, just big long talk. And
10:30 at night to 1:30 in the morning.
yeah,
Wow.
obviously when I started going more professional, I had to bring it down a bit and condense it so it wasn't so much of a large walk. But I felt like Moses walking around downtown Provo with all these people, and I still do from time to time because I still have considerably large crowds. I'll be doing a field trip for a high school this coming week, and I'm getting bigger than I thought I would related to this.
Well, it's I think it's awesome that you're able to do what you want to do, being an independent content producer. It's really kind of a rare role that somebody is able to inhabit. So what was your journey into developing, doing the research, and creating the tour?
Well, the tour took me 20 years to create. I mean, it's not the kind of thing, like, if you're going to create anything like a ghost tour, or really anything, you don't want to half-ass it. And there's no Google on my tour. I haven't begged or borrowed or taken anything. I have found every single story on that tour either through field work or through deep research, and then following up with field work. So I've interviewed the people. But my whole life has been steeped in this interest.
That's awesome.
Literally, and it just literally took decades to build this, and I had enough information. I lucked out to find enough stories in this little 1 mile radius, or I guess not radius, but 1 mile walk, where I could just take people around downtown Provo, like a 2-hour walking tour, and it's perfect. And then they seem to like it. So,
yeah, and I think that anymore in this day and age, everybody is getting everything online, including most people who are so-called content creators. And so when you were developing your tour, did you just go out and just interview, look for journals, look for diary entries? How did that happen?
All that and more. Like, I grew up alone on a farm, and I lived on this farm alone most of the time. And one of my dads got me this book called Childcraft Mysteries and Fantasies. And this is when I was like 5 or 6, and I knew all these words that were in the back of my vernacular, like Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, but I didn't have anything. I had no media, had nothing to really place those words. And this book just kind of blew up my world. And I used that book to kind of dovetail out to research more. And as the years passed and decades passed, I would go interview people and find people that had stories to tell, and I would collect them and I'd document them.
When you're still just a kid?
When I was little, like when I was like in junior high.
Nice.
In high school, and I'd be collecting stories for a very long time. Some of them I've lost over the years because I collected them when I was so young, but some of them were just so prominent that I'd never forget them. One of my best and favorite stories that I've ever collected is a quite benign story, though. Actually, the experience of investigating it was far more interesting than actually the story itself. I got this, and this is like 2003. I got this telephone call from this old dude who lived in Draper, Utah. He says, "I got a story for you. I saw your flyers." I had these flyers all over Utah saying I'm looking for weird stories. And I want to talk to you about something I saw in St. George. I'm like, "Okay, well, what'd you see? You're not going to believe me until you talk to me." So I went to his trailer park. Now, I want to paraphrase. I have nothing against trailer parks. I'm just painting a very vivid picture here. So I had my former euphemism with me at the time, and we go to his trailer, and he opens the door for me, and immediately this massive plume of cat piss just hits me like a ton of bricks, slams into me like the worst smell you can ever imagine. I love cats, but in moderation. So I walk into his little trailer, and with every foot I step, I take, there is a literal mushroom cloud of cat fur that rises from the carpet, and I could literally see in the air the cat piss particles floating around. There are about 18 cats in here.
Oh gosh!
And I mean, and
just
so
a little trailer
full of all these cats. To his credit, they were nice cats. But I sit down on what I think was a couch, and he pulls out this typewriter written page, where and I've long lost this page. It disappeared, but the story is it sticks with me, so I don't really need it. So in 1965, St. George's Thanksgiving Day, he went for a walk while dinner was being prepared. He was visiting friends, and he was out in this field by these two trees, and he says he saw two rabbits the size of heifer calves, like sitting in the field.
Isn't that a Jimmy Stewart movie?
Right? And he says that they were like red in color, and one was red and white, and they were just grazing underneath these trees. And I was like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah." And I swear to you, and I'll tell you, I'd been drinking, but I hadn't been drinking a lot. So I was still coherent enough, and I swear to you, I saw these things, and they looked like giant rabbits. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. So I really shook his hand because I wanted to get out of there because I could feel the cat piss going into my pores. And I went home, I burnt my clothes, took a shower of Clorox, and then I immediately did some research. And then I found a few stories relating to people. Now, backing up, cryptozoology is something that I'm known for. I do a lot of work. I began in cryptozoology. I'm not a cryptozoologist, though. There's no such thing as a cryptozoologist. They don't exist. There's no school to go to become one. There's no certificate.
And explain what cryptozoology is.
The true definition of cryptozoology is the study of animals not yet recognized by science.
Okay.
And so, but most people say it's a search for monsters.
Loch
It's
Ness,
not.
Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so in cryptozoology, there's this arena where there are these out-of-place animals. And these are usually animals that have been escaped from zoos, escaped from personal collections, or, escaped from a circus even, depending on the time period. And they linger in that area. Well, in that, I found a few stories relating to kangaroos that had been seen in that area of Utah that, obviously aren't native to there. But it's much more likely than being a gigantic rabbit the size of a baby cow lingering in there. So in that same area, I find stories of kangaroos. So I pretty much hypothesize that what he actually saw were these kangaroos, if he saw anything, that had escaped from a personal collection.
That would make sense.
And then he, being perhaps tipsy, or maybe never seeing a kangaroo in his life, I don't know.
Or perhaps the cat piss had like demented his brain.
Totally, which is a thing. It's an actual thing.
Is it? So you get a story, you do research on that story, you validate it. Are you trying to validate it, or are you trying to invalidate it at the same time?
I'm trying to do both, because I think
you're not going to accept every single story that you get at face value. You're going to have to do some research to see if this is plausible, because aren't most of your stories first-person testimonies?
First or second-person testimonies.
And not a lot of people can back up the claims.
No, by no means. And that's what folklore is about, too. I mean, when you're not dealing with foodways or textiles or elements of folklore, when you're talking about oral tradition, every time it gets told, it gets larger and bigger. And some of the stories I've collected have been told dozens of times before they reached me. It's just that they didn't spread out, and they haven't published yet.
Yeah.
Like the old gray woman of Old Town Square of downtown Provo. It's this story of this woman who stands in a corner of the Old Town Square inside it, and she has her face to the wall, and people will walk by and see her and approach her and say, "Are you okay?" And then she just disappears. And then there's this other story of a headless child in that same building, but no one has ever seen a headless child in that building. Never once. They have stories of hearing children running, where there should be no children running around in the most ungodly hours, or they hear children laughing, like in the stereotypical child ghost stories. But for some time in the past, it was made headless, either for dramatic purposes, or just to mess with people.
So say I am. So the guy I've written 2 stories about, who's got paranormal stories, his name is Pete, and he runs Salt Lake Book and Magazine on Main Street. And he keeps, the reason why I did 2 stories on him is I did my first story on him 8 years ago, and he said my brother, I think his brother's name is Skip. He died, and he constantly is haunting me, and I just think this is crazy, and I don't know why he won't move on, what I can do, and he just kind of recounts the story to me, and then I give it to Paige. Paige writes an awesome story about it, but then he gets more and more like ambitious, collecting photographs of orbs, and says this lady came out of the ground. She's floating. She's going down her book aisles, and all the books start flying out of the aisles. And I, it's all interesting, I think, but it's like I have a security camera here at the office. I see little orbs floating around at night. It's just like how do you know what is legit? I mean, how do you know what is not just some crazy person?
You don't.
You just don't.
You don't know, but you use a lot of one thing there's a lot of people in my field that make me look bad. There are some genuine researchers and genuine collectors of folklore who have sold their soul to that devil, and they put their heart and soul into it, and they want to find as close to the truth as possible, and they're willing to accept the most mundane explanations. But there are other individuals that are so impressed with those things called orbs. I hate the whole orb thing.
Yeah, I mean, you get orbs all the time.
All the time. And
like,
if one pops up, like if it's like a dewdrop or something, it's an orb.
Yeah,
like,
I showed it to Gold. It was like a car goes by here, and at the angle of the light hits a certain way, it creates this weird shimmer across the wall. And I say, hey, check this out. And she, don't show me. I don't want to see it. I said, no, it's. You would think it was scary, but there's an explanation. And this crazy like light pattern shimmer orbs show up, and it's like you could easily say that's ghost, but it's not. I mean, I just know it's not.
Exactly. And so like every time someone sends me a picture of an orb, I throw up in my mouth because it's irritating because it's so unimpressive, and people want to have experiences. A lot of people do. And they're so eager to accept any little thing out of the norm that they're going to immediately shelf that with the unexplainable without ever looking at any other arenas. Now, I've found a lot of stuff that can't be explained, stuff that's really impressive and weird. And like I've taken people. I have a second tour called a fairy walk, and it's in this area that I've been researching for about 15 years called the Provo Vortex. It's my baby. And it's the Grandview area of Provo, just west of Deseret Industries, the Provo Deseret Industries. And I've collected so many weird and bizarre stories of people seeing gnomes, fairies. One of my former students who I took on one of my fairy walks, she swears to me that she saw a 15-foot tall, naked, emaciated man standing next to a deciduous tree in Lyons Park, staring at her at midnight. And I mean, these stories are universal. I mean, they are all over the world, including Antarctica. People are having encounters with strange creatures, with ghostly phenomena, or other types of things that can't be explained. And that's been going on since recorded history.
Yeah. And so what's your theory on who and what fairies are?
Nature spirits, if they're real.
Just nature spirits?
Nature. I mean, a lot of my research is, and my approach, I should say, is filtered through my idols of like Manly Palmer Hall, Rudolf Steiner, C.W. Leadbeater, Annie Besant, and these are like romantics of the 19th century who investigated and looked into this type of phenomena. The Theosophist. Theosophy is something for your listeners. If you truly want to understand the unknown from an educated point of view, dig into Theosophy and understand that first, and then you dovetail out, because pop culture is doing a lot of damage to any sincere research that can be put into this.
Yeah, so we were just talking before the show how the Travel Channel has a paranormal show, and they contacted our office and they wanted to get a hold of somebody to talk about stuff like this. So I referred them to you, and talk about why you didn't want to be on their show with what they wanted you to talk about.
Okay, well, what I do, like I said before, I prefer to work with my own material. I'll talk about things that people want me to talk about, from like strange lake creatures, if I need to, for like a foundation. But when I do my sincere research and talk about something with authority, I want it to be my own work or my own research. So they came to me wanting me to talk about these haunted caves. I think it was in South Jordan here. And one, it's something that has been talked about a lot, probably beaten to death. And two, it wasn't really my area because it's not something I've had any interest in delving into. Because if there are enough people looking at a topic, I'm not going to touch it, especially if it's locally, because I prefer to be authentic as I can.
Yeah, and original, right?
And completely original. And I think that's what I like to think that's what separates me from other individuals in my quote unquote field. But I don't get along with those other people in my field. I can't stand them.
Yeah, well, it's like when we first, I think you first contacted us and told us about what you had, none of the stuff you had I ever heard of before. I mean, most of the stuff that comes up, it's like the Trolley Square ghost named Wally. I hear that one all the time. It's interesting, but it's like everybody tells the same story over and over again, and it's like it's been done. So you basically just had to tell Travel Channel, this isn't my area. If you want to talk about Provo or something else, then they should come pay a visit to you, and you can talk about what you know.
I mean, I can talk about international, like cryptozoology, the theories, the hypotheses surrounding folklore and legend and mythology, in a very broad spectrum. But it's not like I couldn't go and talk about unicorns or something like that. I mean, I did a lecture on unicorns at Utah University in 2010. It got me a teaching position there.
Oh, really?
Because
that's how you got your job?
Pretty much.
Wow.
More or less. It just was like that was the catalyst of me getting my teaching position there.
Yeah.
Because my approach it wasn't just talking about Lisa Frank unicorns and all the nonsense that people think they know about unicorns. You know, there are like 87 different unicorns across the globe. Yeah.
Wow.
They all have different mentalities, different morphologies, different legends surrounding them. Some are peaceful, some are angry, some are violent, some are murderous, you know? And then there's like ways that you can prove unicorns were real. You can actually prove they're real.
How do you do that?
It's just how you look at it. It's how you approach the topic. So here's an example. There is this idea that certain extinct animals, before they became completely extinct, they lingered into historically known times, and people saw them. And that's how a lot of legends and folklore began.
Like
so
woolly mammoths.
Like that. But also you have the Russian, the Russian black unicorn, which is this violent, huge black unicorn that would run down the steps or the steppe and like attack people and knock them off the horse and kill them. Well, in that same area, you also have the Elasmotherian woolly rhinoceros. So and
those are real.
Those were real. They're dead
They have
now.
skeletons of them.
We have fossils, and if you use common sense and if science and folklore would just get their acts together and cooperate more, like they used to, we wouldn't even need cryptozoology. But it's just that there's so many people out there in my arena that are trying to prove that there are monsters and scary things out there that are being seen. I'm giving a lecture in December at Utah University on December 3rd. I've been invited by the Earth Science Department, to talk about cryptozoology. And I have to dovetail it into geology and paleontology. And actually the title of the lecture is
Sorry about that. Scamps. Luckily, these microphones will pick up just right what's in front of it, so
Okay, cool.
you can keep talking.
The cooperation of science and folklore in cryptozoology. So there are these stories coming out of all over the world of surviving dinosaurs. There are no surviving dinosaurs. There are none. But the stories linger. And then in Africa, there are multiple stories of surviving dinosaurs. One particularly is Mokilmembe. The most popular is supposed to be a sauropod or a podosaurus or a brontosaurus-like dinosaur. But in the area where Mokilmembe is seen, quote unquote, seen or reported, there are no sauropod fossils in the record. They're not even there.
Oh, really?
So why aren't individuals that are legitimately researching and looking at this phenomena, why aren't they looking at from the ground up, literally? Oh, well, there's obviously no sauropod fossils here, so why are we considering this to be a possible sauropod? Well, yeah, the native traditions and folklore are saying it's a large reptile with 4 legs, long tail, and long neck, and it's semi-aquatic. Well, yes, you can also describe a monitor lizard like that. You could describe the Komodo dragon. What is the Mokilmembe, if it is real, which I think it is, but I think it's just an unknown animal that we haven't discovered yet. Something like an as yet discovered type of large monitor lizard.
You said it's called what?
The Mokilmembe.
Is that the Komodo dragon?
No, the Komodo dragon is a known animal.
Oh,
but I think like
that's an unknown. That's still a
that is a known.
that
It is
falls,
known.
Okay.
The Komodo dragon is known.
Yeah, but the one you just mentioned,
Mokilmembe
Mokilmembe
is a cryptid.
Okay.
And
that falls in
cryptozoology. But everyone's looking for a dinosaur. And very few people, like Roy Mackal was looking for a dinosaur and a type of unknown monitor lizard. Some people are looking for that, but a lot of individuals really just want it to be a dinosaur so bad that they refuse to do any real, what seems to me, any real research to like dig down and find out, like, well, since there's nothing in the record, nothing in the fossil record, it can't be this. So let's start looking somewhere else.
So they just don't talk to each other.
A lot.
Cryptozoologists and
they do.
paleontologists, they do talk to each other, but they
just
don't do research together.
They do that too. It's just that a lot of them are so excited.
Well, so, okay, you just wrote a story for us about Bigfoot and some of the folklore surrounding Bigfoot. And your story was in our current issue, right? of Utah Stories?
It was
Or
about a month or so ago.
Yeah, and so what's your take on Bigfoot? Does he exist? Should paleontologists start looking for Bigfoot?
I say yes, there is something causing these sightings. I'm just not going to say that it's a gigantic ape man. I would sure as heck like it to be. Mm-hmm. But you have a lot of misidentification. Bernard Heuvelman, the father of cryptozoology, he created this term that he called the snare of mythification, where individuals see something that they can't fully recognize, and they fill in the holes with myth and legend. Yeah. To try and like a Lego piece to try and build what they think they saw. Mm-hmm. I had an encounter with something that when I was 10 years old on my farm that I don't know what it was. And I could very well, my 10-year-old mind could still be using the snare mythification to describe it. But I think back then I thought I saw Bigfoot and I wrote about it. Mm-hmm. In another Bigfoot article for you, but I didn't accept it. I actually just came out of the closet owning that story as my own just a couple months ago because I figured whatever, and I really have no.
So what did you see? Was it was a 10-foot furry man?
It was like a 7-foot tall. Well, on the farm I grew up. We had these twice a summer. My dad would create basically a swamp. He'd water the fields. It was like a big 15 or so acre swamp after he got done with it because we had water rights back like the old school.
Got to use them or lose them.
And so we'd fill up the whole thing, and I had these 4 mutts, long-nosed cows, Scaredy, Fasty, and Pee-wee that always play with me out in the field. And when it was drowning, it was the best time to be alive because you just had so much freaking fun. All the insects would come up to the surface, catch all the beetles and everything. So much easier. It was great. But there were these 3 large pockets of Russian olive trees, which, if you're familiar with them, you can't even walk through them when they're close because there's so many thorns and spines.
Those line the Jordan River.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed tons of them. Yeah.
So I was walking along the edge of one of the little canals that was dug, and Longnose and Fasty were with me, and I see this movement about 20 feet away from me in the middle of the Russian olive trees. And there's this thing standing there. It was a humanoid. It was like green and brownish in color. There was shadows around it, distorting it a bit. But it moved, and I could see a face. I saw a face looking at me, and it stood there. And the 10-year-old me is saying it was at least 6 or 7 feet tall. But it was like big and burly. And it had one of its arms, his right arm, up, kind of holding on to part of the Russian olive tree. And it just stared at me with this face that looked very human. And I watched this thing for maybe like 5 or 10 minutes. And then I noticed my dogs were long gone, but they never barked. And I was about maybe 70 or 90 yards away from the farmhouse where I grew up, where I was living. And I started to back up. And I backed up, keep my eye on this thing, till I got about 40 yards away from it. I turned around and ran to the house.
Wow.
And
But you made out its whole form?
Yeah. I ran upstairs, looked back out the window that was facing the field where I was at, and nothing was there. Now, I'm not saying I saw Bigfoot. I'm not saying, I don't know what I saw, but I did see something that I can't explain. And it wasn't, I can guarantee it wasn't an act of the imagination. It wasn't a thought form. It wasn't a tulpa. Well, it could have been a tulpa. Maybe it was a tulpa. But
what's a tulpa?
Oh man, that's a real sticky question to ask. We need a whole nother podcast for that. But essentially, there is this theory that emotions create form in life, and with enough concentration, and if you focus on something, it will take life. And so a lot of the surrealist artists would paint thought forms into their artwork. If you're interested in that, you learn about Cedar Lebeder's book and Annie Besant's book titled Thought Forms, which is a beautiful introduction to the topic. But so they would paint a lot of what they saw in surrealist paintings. Like The Woman in Moscow, which is a painting by Kandinsky, I believe, is actually takes place inside of a thought form. So it's an artistic approach towards defining and painting what you see in the astral plane.
Interesting.
In theory. But there's some theories that, like, if enough people focus on something, it can create life. So what if, like, Bigfoot is one of the world's most powerful thought forms? What if these things and legs people are seeing are the world's most powerful thought forms? Either way, you're dealing with something metaphysical. It's just another theory to consider, and it's a really fun one to play with too.
Yeah.
But if it is real, I think it was the Green Man.
Interesting. Well, we'll take a little break. I have some listener letters, listener letters. I get about one a month with these crazy outlandish stories. I want to share with you something I just recently got about the Bear Lake Monster, how that theory came about, and it's really pretty entertaining. So we'll touch on that when we get back.
Cool.
I'm just going to... All right, we're back with Danny B. Stewart. He runs the Provo Ghost Tours, and he's a folklorist and contributor for Utah Stories, has been for years. So this lady sent this to me. Man, I want to give her credit. I hope I can find the envelope. Oh, man. So Anne, I believe this is Eliga Hunter Rich, wife of Joseph C. Rich. Sent this to me. So Joseph C. Rich was a humorist who lived in Bear Lake, and she sent me this article. This is the humor section of, gosh, what newspaper? Man, I want to say that this was from the Deseret News. But anyway, so Joseph C. Rich, one of the famous early Mormon pioneers, was named Charles C. Rich. He was an apostle and colonizer. So Joseph Rich was his son. And this is a pretty long article. I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. But it's how Joseph C. Rich, who was a humorist, a storyteller, he, through the years, went back and forth from Utah and Idaho. He told all these stories. And this, according to this article, it was his masterpiece. And perhaps the finest example of a pure hoax ever recorded, which was the Bear Lake Monster story. One day in 1868, he sat down with his tongue in cheek and penned off an amazing report to the Deseret News concerning a great green-eyed monster which was purported to have been seen by a resident near the lake. The description was terrifying, and he ended the article with a series of stirring questions. Was it a fish, flesh, or serpent? Amphibious and fabulous, or just a great fib? He demanded, claiming to be reporting only what he had heard, not what he had seen. Shortly, reports were streaming from the people who claimed that they'd seen the monster. Investigators were sent out from Salt Lake. The Deseret News was eager to confirm the unusual scoop. Men and women were known to be sober, level-headed, of the best character, and they would swear an oath that they had seen it. For 20 years, the argument raged. Was there or was there not a Bear Lake monster? At last, Joseph, now the late years of his life, sat down and wrote, "It was a first-class lie," but knowing that he'd caused laughter, amusement for thousands, and he tested the credulity of egoists and humbled the scoffer, he apparently had no regrets and never expressed any. So I guess that kind of goes along the lines that you can create something out of thin air, and people can then believe in it, and then they can see it. Do you believe? Do you think
they think they can?
Yeah.
That's old. That's an old news.
You've heard this before
dozens of times, and I don't even bother with the Bear Lake creature anymore. It's just there's nothing. I honestly can't think of any recent stories or anything coming out of there in a long time. And everything that you Google or try to find relating to it and do any research is just the same thing over and over again. Rarely ever is anything new. I just say nothing is ever really new about it, so I consider it dead in the water, literally.
Yeah, and I find it kind of interesting because I remember as a kid going out on Bear Lake, and it's the deepest lake in Utah. They don't know. I think they didn't know for a long time how deep it was, but it's over 200 feet deep. And I think when you have a lake so deep, you can imagine that somehow some creatures can be lurking at the bottom of it. And I thought we were like looking for it when I was a kid. I remember being on the lake.
There's so much trash relating to that, though, that just pollutes the story and the water, like an underground tunnel from Bear Lake to Loch Ness. Cryptozoologists today are still talking about the theory that it might be a gigantic beaver, prehistoric beaver that still lingers.
But Loch Ness is actually more reputable. Do you think that
Absolutely.
theory?
That thing is, if solely alone because of the research that's been put into it, I mean, we have a pretty good idea what might be in there now. I mean, there's been recent studies, DNA studies. I mean, and Roy P. Mackle. I should tell you this first. I'm actually cryptozoology royalty.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Roy P. Mackle is one of the big fathers of cryptozoology. He went after Mikumamembe, went after Loch Ness, and he was the mentor of my mentor, Dr. Paul J. Bybee. He teaches at Utah University. He's a paleontologist.
I've heard that name.
And he and I have done lectures together about surviving dinosaurs and stuff together. And I'm Dr. Bybee's student, and he's been mentoring me for years. So we're kind of cryptozoology royalty, which I'm proud to say every single time I say it.
Nice.
It's kind of cool, really, when you think about it. But like Loch Ness is a whole different beast, literally and figuratively, chronologically, centuries of stories surrounding it, fascinating stuff, all different types of morphologies coming out of that thing. But then we have Roy Mackle, who talks about the likelihood when he wrote, I think it was The Monsters of Loch Ness, I forget his book, but Roy Mackle's the author, and he kind of was the daddy of the theory that it could be a type of a large eel or a type of large salamander, which I love those theories because they're, even if it's a new type of eel or even like a huge eel, you still have the romance of something in there.
But Loch Ness is freshwater lake. It's extremely deep. Like, isn't it more like 1,000 feet deep?
Yeah, it's huge.
Massively deep.
It's very narrow, but it's huge across the entire country of Scotland. But yeah, I mean, everyone wants it to be a plesiosaur, but I got news for you, people. As much as we want it to be, it's not a plesiosaur, it's not a mosasaur, it's not an elasmosaur.
So, just from a scientific explanation, why is it that there could not be any surviving dinosaurs?
Dr. Bybee should take this question, but he's not here. But it's mainly because of the atmosphere. The atmosphere, they couldn't survive.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
They couldn't survive in today's atmosphere?
No.
Was the
atmosphere? My understanding, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a folklorist. I'm a traditions bearer, so I'm not putting an asterisk by everything I say. But from what I've been told and been taught by Dr. Bybee, it lingers around mainly because the atmosphere was not suitable for them.
Huh. That's interesting.
Now, that's not to say that over time something couldn't evolve, because there are certain things that could have evolved. And look at the coelacanth. Coelacanth is a perfect example. That thing was thought extinct for 65 million years, but the indigenous peoples were catching them and eating them. And like Dr. Latimer finally found, like 1938.
That was one of the best National Geographic specials I ever saw. I remember I was so glued to that, and the coelacanth, hunting for it and finding it.
Yeah, and now they're all over the place. They're well known, and that's an example of Methuselah taxa or Lazarus taxa, where something is thought to be extinct, but then we find it later on. But like something that people need to understand. Cryptozoology, the true cryptozoologist, although the cryptozoologist does not exist in the actual sense, cryptozoology is a very worthwhile endeavor if done correctly. Now look at the giant panda. That was a monster. The Wukong ox. That was a monster. The Komodo dragon. That was a monster. The giant mountain gorilla was a monster. The aardvark was a monster. Okay? They thought these things were complete bullcrap. The platypus was thought to be creative taxidermy.
Wow, really?
And it took so long and so many specimens to prove.
Like, how long ago was a platypus?
It's the 1800s, I think. I don't have my notes, so I can't really say for sure. But, I mean, the stories, for a really good introduction about the origins of cryptozoology, anything that's written by Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans, on the track of unknown animals in particularly, by Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans, and it's going to cost you $100 to buy, but it has one of the most beautiful stories revolving around the platypus you'll find, and about the discovery of it and the attempt to try and prove its existence. Same with the aardvark. I mean, try to explain the aardvark to someone. They're nocturnal. They live in what it looks like. Try explaining a giraffe. If we didn't know what a giraffe was, try telling people we got this long-necked spotted zebra that roams around the savannah. Yeah. You know, you're full of crap.
Yeah, sloths too. You look at those, you can't believe they.
The mountain gorilla is thought to be a Bigfoot-like creature that kidnapped women. The giant panda was known by the indigenous people of Asia. They knew about it. It wasn't until science accepted it when it was actually.
So when you consider all of those creatures that people thought were monsters, and then you branch out to like unicorns, do you think that there's a really good chance that unicorns did exist? Do you think, like...
Of course they did, just not in the form that we're familiar with. They're polluted with myth. They're polluted. The stories are polluted.
So you think eventually one day we're going to find a skeleton?
No, it's not like that. Some of them were creative taxidermy. Yeah. Some of them were man-made. There's this... So in the 1930s, this biologist by the name of Dr. Franklin Dove starts manipulating and playing with horn buds of horned animals. And he finally is successful. And you can Google this to find these photos. And he put this animal to pasture. He made a unicorn bull, put it to pasture, and essentially it kind of became the alpha male. And he built this theory around it where he thinks that.
So wait, you back up a little. He built it?
Yeah.
Meaning
I should. So I know how to do this. I haven't done it yet. I probably won't because I love animals too much, but I really, really want to. There's like this window of opportunity after a horned animal is born where you can slice the head open and the horn buds are malleable.
No way.
And you compress the horn buds together, side by side, so they're touching, and then you suture them real quick, and then you put the
So you could do that with a bull, but you couldn't. How could you do? You couldn't do that with a horse.
A calf. No, it's not. There's no horns though. The whole horse thing is just nonsense.
So you could
It's
you
fluff.
could make a bull.
You could make a
with
bull
one-
unicorn.
You can bull unicorn.
But so and when he put this bull out to pasture, it kind of had this alpha male mentality. So we kind of thought that maybe our ancestors utilized this in early animal husbandry. Well, later on in the 70s, this self-proclaimed wizard by the name of Oberon Zellravenhart and his partner, more than going to Kurt, I think, they find his research and they start manipulating the horn buds of another animal. And it was goats. And you take a white goat and you give that thing a horn, and there's your damn unicorn. Exactly like it, because in the true artwork, in the tapestries, they got low cloven hooves. And they actually sold one, I think Lancelot was his name, to Barnum and Bailey Circus in the 70s. You can find all this online. It's quite easily Googleable. But really, no one really digs into the whole lore around it to kind of connect the pieces of how this could be the catalyst of the unicorn legend. And this is all hypothesis. And I have a theory that I think goats were made in the past, like in medieval times, and they were novelty pets, like Pomapoo, Pikachu, all those $5,000 mutts that people are buying today. And they were bought by royalty, and then eventually people just lost interest in them, and then the lore kind of built upon that. That's only if we're talking about the einhorn, though, the einhorn unicorn, which is the most popular, well-known unicorn. But again, that's just a hypothesis I have just to play with. And
that sounds feasible.
And that's all we have dealing with this. But then you have all of these other, like you have another 85, 86 unicorns across the world that I've found. And some of them might be the same unicorn, just different names.
So that's another thing I find really fascinating, is that the same groups of monsters exist in cultures separated vastly by geography, right? So fairies show up in both South American and European lore, right?
All over the place.
And same with unicorns, and same with, like, how many different creatures span geographical continents?
You can't put a number on that, but the number is huge.
Like what are some of the ones you can name off the top of your head that just are most common? Just
dragons for one. Fairy folk, gnomes, sylphs, undines, salamanders.
Why do you think dragons are so common?
They're awesome?
Yeah,
They're freaking cool. I mean, they're one of the coolest.
I mean,
monster
if you
out
want to
there.
talk about something scary, a giant flying lizard that can breathe or blow out fire and incinerate anything in front of it. But why would so many different societies and cultures come up with the concept of a dragon?
Well, now we're digging into theoretical archaeology here and theoretical history, and we really don't know for certain. But I think we had more contact with each other than we realize a long time ago.
Stories were shared.
Stories were
across the
shared more
continents.
often, and I also think that, there's always that chance that they were real. There is that snowball that didn't melt. It's a chance that some of these things might be real, but the Komodo dragon was thought to be a dragon type thing. I mean, it breathes fire because its saliva is toxic. So maybe that's just a stretch of the folklore. Because how do they hunt? They sneak up, they take a bite, and then they wait. And then the toxin in their saliva poisons the animal, and then it just eventually gets weak and falls over, and they go in for the kill. So maybe they stretch that story into fire. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's kind of how folklore works.
Or probably, I've read that the reason why it was the snake in the Garden of Eden is because when we were very primitive, more than 5,000 years ago, the scariest thing that killed so many people were snakes, because we spent most of our time in trees, living in trees, and the worst thing that could happen is a snake comes and climbs your tree and bites you and poisons you or your family.
But then there are so many legends and folklore in other cultures where the serpent is so benign and so benevolent.
Really?
I mean, there are tons, and it's forgotten, and we can't get into that now. That's a whole nother couple of days. That's a whole class period. or actually, that's more of like a whole semester. But they're
Just studying the
just
folklore
studying
around
the
snakes.
folklore around the serpent,
Yeah.
and through history and through religion, and how different cultures view them as benign,
Well, I
benevolent.
find it interesting that the goddess Medusa, her head was snakes,
Mm-hmm.
and that if you looked at her, you would freeze and turn to stone, and she was the greatest goddess in Greek mythology, right?
Well, she wasn't, but she was, and what she was punished. That was her punishment, to become a gorgon. You know, because I believe I don't on top of my head, but one of the goddesses was jealous of her beauty, so she punished her to be a gorgon.
Hmm.
And
But you see that recurring theme of the snake over and over again, and that the snake is, the temptress, the tempter of Eve in the Garden of Eden. And
look, I think a lot of the fears we have today have been created by the vilification of old gods. I think a lot of the fears that we have are created by religion centuries ago, vilifying the old lore, the old gods to create a power structure.
yeah, well,
And I think that that's a lot, and we haven't pulled away from that yet. And that's just kind of some stuff I've been looking into for a long time. It's kind of the conclusion I've come to.
what old gods have been vilified?
Well, like the satyr or the pan. I mean, that looks like Satan to me, if you just look at it from a distance, but these are nature spirits.
Mm-hmm.
These are benevolent beings, horny but benevolent.
And they're
And
like
there's this time period which we have the worship of by Druids or other types of pagan deities, where you didn't need a middleman. You didn't need a middleman to talk to the gods.
mm-hmm.
And then the middleman comes in, and there's money to be made.
And the pagans were basically all throughout Europe before Christianity spread.
Yeah.
And that all changed as Christianity spread. Those pagan religions were
Christianity
heretics and
adopted and stole a lot of the pagan traditions to put them into their own religion, like Christmas and dates. Everything surrounds around the pagans and the old earth gods and earth religions.
Yeah, that's a theory I heard probably 15 years ago, and when I was pretty deep into Christianity, I really dismissed it. But I mean, you look at it. You sent me a YouTube video a while back, and I watched that, and it seems that the idea of a god always being born to a virgin mother, a god being born at the winter time of the winter solstice, or the winter solstice, right? And the god also rising from the dead. Those are common among
Very common
deities.
And so is the flood, the deluge story. That's told on so many different versions throughout the world.
And you cannot dismiss that, because we know enough about ancient lore and mythology that is definitely something that happened. And so when you take the Christ story, you either think, okay, well, that's an amazing set of amazing coincidences that he possesses all the same characteristics of traditional gods, or that those sets of ideas were placed onto the Christ story so that the majority of the Roman Empire would accept Jesus. Which of those two theories do you think is more likely to be true?
I think the fact that a lot of the stuff was placed and created for the acceptance.
Yeah.
That's where I stand. And I'm no atheist, but I just think that from what I've...
Well, I still
it's more
consider myself a Christian, but I do believe that
I'm no
a lot of these
Christian.
ideas were placed on top of the Christ story to see widespread acceptance and to gain widespread acceptance, because anytime you have an empire, you need people all kind of believing in the same thing, being in part of the same tribe, and I see that was really necessary back then.
Well, there's no way to tell. There's no way to tell now. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah.
Someday.
Being in Provo, which is a hotbed of Mormonism, obviously, it's where you have Brigham Young University. You have by far the majority of the people there or LDS. Do your stories jive with Mormons?
Oh, they love them.
Oh, I bet.
It's because they have that. They're all about. Well, most of them are all about the that thin veil, where we can still communicate with our loved ones, or et cetera, and it gives you hope. That's what I've been told. Like my grandfather told me a story about how he believes that his deceased brother visited him in the form of a blue fireball one night. And that's a universal story throughout Mormon folklore, too. And the Mormons love
what's
my
a universal story?
Just the deceased loved ones visiting in Mormon folklore. It's very common, I should say. Maybe universal is the wrong word to use, but it's a very common story that's told over again, and in many cultures too. But in Mormonism particularly, the Mormon folklore is very endearing. I enjoy it a lot, and I find that Mormons love my stuff. They're my best customers, not only because they're the most of the population, but like they really dig it.
Well, it's cool when Mormons can be open-minded enough to understand that there's all sorts of theories, there's all sorts of ideas, there's all sorts of myths, legends, folklore, and they don't have to just think inside of their box or see the world inside of their box.
Oh, absolutely. And like BYU is an excellent example of that. With their folklore archives, they're collecting all my research, and they're going to.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And they found it through you guys, through my articles, and they're actually they've expanded it now. They stopped what they were doing, and they're actually filming my life story first.
They're filming you and your life story?
I'm telling my story, my
wow.
life story, my kind of autobiography. They're filming that so they have context for all of the stuff I'm going to give them eventually, which is over 170-ish original stories that I've collected over the years involving Utah folklore that haven't been cataloged anywhere. Like some of the stuff, all of that stuff is my discovery, so to speak.
Yeah, good for BYU.
And
I
so
think that's awesome.
It is, and it's going to give me an incredible amount of credibility, and hopefully it'll help me to become a professor again, which is my ultimate goal, because I know I'm a good teacher, so that's where I belong. So we'll see.
So what you want to tell the story of how what happened with your teaching career? Like you were teaching at UVU, correct? And
I was teaching at UVU, and I was teaching adjunct teaching humanities through the arts at Utah University, and I loved it. Had a cult following. It was great, and I stupidly left it to go seek a master's degree and PhD in folklore, eventual PhD in folklore, at a school, a graduate program that was not a folklore program in any true sense. In my opinion, it was just an overglorified gender studies program, and after two semesters, God, it was in Oregon. That's all I can say. But you guys will probably figure it out. But the professors there were just so disappointing. There was this one professor who I had such faith in, amazing amount of faith in, and he, when I started taking his classes, it was just he used the same syllabus for everything. I'm not kidding you either. I'm not exaggerating. He used the same damn syllabus with the same projects for everything. The only difference from an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree, there's a 10-page paper. He talked about the same stuff. I took 2 or 3 of his classes, and it was the same class. And I'm like, dude, do you love this topic or not? Where's your research? What have you done? You call yourself a folklorist? We're supposed to be preserving this information. We are tradition bearers. We are supposed to gather this information. We're supposed to save it from in oblivion. We're supposed to keep it. We're not supposed to regurgitate the same shit just because we're lazy. And all you guys do, you get this damn cushy job and you just sit around on your asses and don't do anything new. You don't collect anything. And the shit you do collect is stuff that's been regurgitated a dozen times already. What the hell is wrong with you? That's how I felt. And I saw people doing the folklore of internet cat videos. I saw people doing the folklore of female roller derby and getting funding for it. You know what I was going to do? I was going to start with Hanuman, the monkey god, the Hindu Vedic monkey god. and use him as a focal point and branch out and try and find a mythological connection between him and all the other giant ape-man legends throughout the world. Like Bigfoot, Yeti, the Momo, the Yowie, the Ring Pendak, those types of things. Try to attempt to find a connection between this. They knew what I did. It's just I wasn't shoving feminism in everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have nothing against it. But this is folklore.
Yeah, well, that's my problem with the humanities in the way it's taught in universities today. It's getting so washed out with indoctrination and pop psychology and all these ideas, politically correctness, that it's losing its grounding in scientific fact and research, and that you want to create silos for your research and your studies. You don't want everything to bleed into everything else.
Well, get this. So here's two examples. Long story short, I walked away from the program. I burnt $40,000 and I walked away from the program because my integrity for folklore was more valuable to me than selling my soul for some stupid piece of paper among people who I considered to be Philistines in this area because of just how they approached it. It was insulting to me. And then they're all praising folklore like they actually respect it and love it and worship it. And I'm like, then do something about it. But I would ask if I could use certain authors, like the grandfathers and great-grandfathers of folklore in my research. We don't use them too much, though, because, they might have owned slaves, or they use the N-word or something. We can't use them. Well, yeah, they may have been assholes at one point, but you know what? Their research,
discredit research.
Their research was still valuable.
Yeah.
Or one time I was in class and we were talking about the terror that comes in the night, the night terrors, and the incubus and succubus. And I raised my hand to ask a question I knew the answer of, but I was kind of testing to see, because this is kind of like the last straw I was putting on the camel's back. Mm-hmm. And I said, so has anyone ever found a connection between these night terrors where children die and SIDS? Has there been a legendary folklore connection there? We don't want to talk about that. And we might offend someone in this class. We don't want to talk about that. And I just stood up. I was like, done. I'm done. I couldn't handle it anymore. It broke my heart. It broke my spirit. I became an alcoholic because everything I believed in, the people who were supposed to protect folklore and promote it and teach it in its purity were just hacks. Mm-hmm. They may have the credentials, but they sure as hell aren't using them in any proper way, in my opinion. But what do I know? I'm just a big hairy monkey.
No, that's sad. I mean, I just see that in the humanities and the universities. And so for example, I was really interested in psychology in high school. I had a really excellent teacher, and I wrote a really disparaging article about my high school because it was a football program with a high school attached at Skyline High School up here. There were some excellent teachers. I got to give that caveat. Chaz Adams taught psychology up there. He was an amazing teacher. But he taught about Carl Jung and Maslow and Rogers and our hierarchy of needs and our collective unconscious. Just these really great foundational pieces to psychology. What I find interesting is that all these guys who made up the bedrock of developing the whole foundation of what the psyche is, they all died like 80 years ago. And everything new that's been coming to psychology is just a bunch of horse shit.
I totally get it. I know exactly what you mean. You are absolutely right.
Yeah, and you read the new stuff coming out about. So I had a debate online with a guy about, I hate all these freaking labels. You got ADD, ADHD, you got bipolar, you got schizophrenia, you got borderline personality. So these are all fine and good as far as using them to classify people who have conditions, who have behavioral disorders. But then calling these things diseases, I have a big problem with, because there's a big difference between a disease and a disorder. A disease, you can prescribe a drug and it will cure the disease. A disorder, the pharmaceutical companies would love to call disorders diseases, because then you can prescribe a drug and it will cure the disease. But they're not diseases, they're disorders.
Yeah.
But they're totally blurring the lines between disorders and diseases deliberately. The psychology is becoming so watered down. They don't want to do authentic research in most academic institutions. I'm so glad Johns Hopkins is getting a huge research grant to study psilocybin and go back down that road, because that actually showed a ton of promise. But it's like you see these soft sciences, and they become soft because the people running those academic institutions are soft. They're just soft, mushy minds, I think.
Absolutely.
So
it's irritating.
Anyway, I guess our rants overlap.
No, at least I totally get it. I get it completely. I worked in the philosophy and humanities department at UVU, and I saw it every day. I saw it, and it was just like it's like we needed cushions on the walls.
Yeah, and everybody's afraid of saying something to offend, and I feel like the worst thing that I see popping up, and I went to a Ben Shapiro speech, and I interviewed all these kids that were protesting. The worst thing I see is this politically correct movement. Like, everybody agrees Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. All these white kids, I don't know where they came from. They all descended at the U. They were chanting, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives. And there was this poor guy caught in the milieu, and they were pushing their signs and hitting him in the face with his signs, because they thought they identified this guy as a white supremacist. And there's this whole group called Antifa. Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
Their slogan is punch a Nazi in the face. So if they think, because you said something that might be perceived as being over the line racist, and then you become a Nazi and they want to punch you in the face. And there's nothing really behind it other than that slogan. Let's all go out and punch Nazis in the face.
Yeah.
And this poor dude's just getting this poster slammed at him because they thought they identified a white supremacist. And I'm just like, God, this is... And if you want to watch that video, it's on YouTube.
I've watched it several times, actually.
Yeah, it's
I
really an eye-opener.
I used to be an activist when I was in college, and I was never militant, though. But I just can't stand the people anymore. I can't stand it.
And that these demonstrations are organized by professors at the university who call themselves I did a little research, Students for a Democratic Society. Sounds like a great institution. Sounds really wonderful. They used to be about free speech on campus. Now they're about suppressing free speech. They don't want to have any conflicting ideas that aren't politically correct showing up and talking. And there's nothing better in a democratic society than people talking, expressing their views, even if you disagree with
conversation, trying to at least come to, if not a compromise, an understanding at least.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I really disagree with this guy. That gives you a great reason to go listen to him. What do you disagree with? Why don't you develop your analytical thinking in your brain so you understand, without regurgitating other ideas you've heard, why it is you disagree with this person? I think it's one of the best practices to actually develop as a human being, and they want to take that away. That's really their goal.
And that's pretty much the main reason why I walked away from it. I mean, I have a minor in peace and justice studies from UVU, and it was that degree was all about basically that kind of thing, seeking out justice for the underprivileged and the downtrodden of society. But then it just turned into something that, I mean, not that degree, not the program so much, but I mean, just the whole arena is just, there's no dialogue anymore, and you're just labeled a Nazi for.
And that's why, with this podcast, we went in a political direction, but because I am non-binary politically, you can't call me a Republican or a Democrat, or you can't call this magazine either one. Political candidates don't want to come on here because we are about truth. And if you're just about truth, that's like pouring sand into the crankshaft. It just doesn't make sense with the political machine
I wish.
that you would actually want to find the truth to situations and matters.
I don't know. I don't understand journalism enough to say this, but I just like, or a reporter, like, why can't a reporter just have the balls to ask a question that needs to be asked and then keep pressing the individual to answer it? And then just the fact that they won't answer that question, I think, should be damning enough. But just by asking it once, but ask again and again and again, say, so why aren't you answering this question directly?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And to ask questions in a way that really challenges their depth of understanding of the issues. That is not done in our mainstream media. There's been all these mayoral debates. Like, we got these two candidates. They're two ladies, Erin Mendenhall, Luz Escamilla. Escamilla was on our program. Sorry for pronouncing her name, Escamilla. I got a lot of shit online for mispronouncing her name. But she was on the program with David Ibarra. I had the two of them here, and I was asking them both, dig deeper. How do you do affordable housing? Tell me a little more. What would you do specifically? And you watch the program and decide for yourself who had a real breadth of understanding of that issue. Who was just regurgitating their talking point and was getting angry because I wasn't okay with them regurgitating the talking point. And I'll just say it was Luz. She would not do anything besides regurgitate the talking point, which is, we got to force developers. I was like, what are you going to do? Handcuff them and hold a gun to their head? You got to develop affordable housing. It's not going to happen. And she won't come back on the program. I'm not about bashing anybody, but I am about finding the truth, and politicians simply don't like that.
No, and that's exactly what you should be doing, and that's why I like your approach. I've always liked your approach in this magazine and the podcasts I have watched, and it's just, or listened to, and it's, people need to press people and not force them, but try to engage them to respond beyond just like saying let's make America great again. What does that even mean? Does that mean less black people? Does that mean less brown people? Is that what that means? Because that's what I think of when I hear that. When I hear "Let's make America great again," I think of racism. I do, but that's my extreme though too, and that's part of my.
I don't think of racism, but I do agree with you. You got to be more specific. Just like hope and change, Obama. I was like, okay, yeah, hope for what and change to what? It's like, they just love to do very extremely superficial campaign slogans, and then very superficial treatment of the issues. And then the thing that's so telling for me in this mayoral season we're in is where you look on all the billboards, on all the city streets, you see the sign with the name. How many people are actually going to go home and learn what that candidate really stands for? And then how many people are going to understand or try to understand what special interests are contributing to their campaigns that might influence their decision making? Because that's the biggest problem I think we have here in Utah. Special interests are pulling all the strings. And in my 12 years of doing this, I wish I could say I was more optimistic about things, but all I can see is that more and more money is flooding into campaigns. More and more special interests are pulling the levers, and our politicians are just puppets. They're just not doing anything for the people. They're doing everything for the special interests. And I would love if somebody could prove me wrong on that.
I don't know.
But yeah, I didn't intend for this to go political.
That's all right. No,
I'm trying to actually get out of politics, but it just makes me so infuriated.
You're right. I mean, like, when people, like everyone I know who are my friends, when they hear "Let's make America great again," they will say, "Well, that person's a racist," and they
really. And if you wear a red MAGA cap,
but I have a lot of friends that actually, that to support Trump, who I get along with fairly well. But politically, we don't see eye to eye in the slightest.
That's awesome. You have that, because I think the number of people who are on one side of the aisle or the other, that still talk to each other and get along, unfortunately, it's just like definitely declining.
The thing that ruffles my tailfeathers, though, every time it comes up, is healthcare and livable wages. Those are, in my opinion, the two most important things that need to be fixed to actually be able to afford to live and be able to go to buy your dinner, to buy your food, and go to the doctor and not worry about picking between those two. You know.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I had a guy on the program who was, a big proponent of a single payer system in the United States, and I think that will probably win out. But whenever anybody says to me, healthcare should be a right, then I say, well, healthcare flows downstream from nutrition and health.
Mm-hmm.
Why shouldn't free, healthy, nutritious food be a right before healthcare?
Oh, absolutely. But I think that should be part of it, though. To say healthcare is a right, I think it shouldn't be so a narrow spectrum of just healthcare pills. It should be nutrition. It should be way of life. It should be exercise, helping people to watch what they're eating and not just shoving, alcohol down their throats or, candies and cakes constantly, unhealthy foods. But why does a salad cost $5 and a burger cost $1?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, fat and sugar calories are now extremely cheap because consumer demand has created it that way.
I mean, I went and bought a salad yesterday for $6 for a small little salad and I was still hungry. But why? I just feel like that should be half the price if I'm trying to eat healthy. I don't know. I've been so far out of politics for so many years. I don't know what the hell I'm saying. But
I can't say I know. But I know that we do these in-depth investigations and research, and it's just really unsettling when you actually understand why things are happening the way they are. When I'm going to do an episode after this about the inland port, we basically just identified some questions that the mainstream media isn't asking. And for example, when does state power end and city power begin? Why, as Salt Lake City residents we're going to be most affected by this giant port and all these semi trucks and airplanes flying in? Why do we get no say in whether there should be or shouldn't be an inland port? And so it's just it's one of those issues where you just wonder, why aren't they asking deeper questions? Why is it we're the only ones doing this? I just don't quite understand that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I admittedly know very little about that.
Well, I'd like to direct people listening or watching to your ghost tour. So how will your tours be going on all year long?
They go all year long by reservation. So I do my it's called the Original Provo, Utah Ghost Tour is the full title. And I have a Facebook page. We'll be getting a website starting back up next month. I have a partner now who's helping me with the more technical side of things, Josh Gibson, who's going to help me get things more to flow easier for me with my work, so I don't have to do as much technical work and business side of it, so I can just focus on the folklore.
Nice.
And then, go to Facebook and find the Original Provo Utah Ghost Tour for now. And there's I have 5 more tours this October. This Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at 8:30, and then Monday and Tuesday.
So people could still go join those tours.
Nice. For October, but after that it's all reservation. Except unless I do a special event tour, which I do off and on.
So could a company of a whole company book you
Absolutely.
for their special event?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, and I could have different variations, different versions of it. Also, I do speaking engagements about local folklore. So it depends on what you want, what you need.
And there's some cool videos of you giving tours on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to tell Tyler to queue one up, but people can check those out and see what your tour's like. And
cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Danny, for being on the program. Yeah, it was fun.
Far out.
All right. Thanks for watching the Utah Stories Show. If you'd like to follow us and be a part of the show, I'd suggest you visit utahstories.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That's really the best way you can be a part of Utah Stories. We will update you once a week on who our guests were. We also cover a lot of bigger issues in depth. We do a lot of stories about entrepreneurs, farmers, makers. We have our big Made in Utah festival coming up It's going to be 3 weekends at the Gateway. We have the first, second, and third weekends of December, and it's going to be awesome. We're working on the final plans and the designs of the rooms, and it's looking like it's going to be great. So I suggest you check out madeinutahfest.com for more information on that. And until next time, this has been Richard Markosian signing out. Thanks for joining us on the Utah Stories Show. If you'd like to be a bigger part of the program, go visit utahstories.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Another way you can be a part of it is you can join us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Those are our 3 social media platforms. We're way more actively involved in YouTube and Instagram than we are any other platforms. And just so you know a little bit about this program, we're into preserving the quality of life we enjoy here in Utah. That pretty much encompasses all of our guests on the program. If that's something you're into as well, then I hope you join us and recommend guests, recommend topics, come with your questions. We're live streaming our episodes every Tuesday at 1:30 on YouTube, so you can join us live. And thanks for being a part of the program. Until next time, this is Richard Markosian signing out.